morning.
Good morning.
No smoke in the air. So over the past several weeks, maybe a month and a half, I've been talking about one of the oldest articulations of the Buddhist path, which is known as the Six Perfections. And all the way through, we've been talking about wisdom or prajna, and particularly emphasizing that prajna isn't a thing. Actually, even things aren't things, which we've been talking a little bit about. But that prajna is, we could say, a way of seeing, as is called out in the Heart Sutra in the first line. We read every Sunday morning, Avalokitasvara Bodhisattva, when deeply practicing prajna paramita, clearly saw that all five aggregates are empty and thus relieved all suffering. So that clear seeing, which I've said several times, also could be read as illuminated seeing, or the illumination of consciousness. There's a lot of, we could play with the words a lot. That is what prajna is about. And that when we live out a life that is supported by and informed by this clear seeing, there is this these ways that we can refine our living towards liberation. And in this particular articulation of the path, the first one is generosity. So we talked a lot about generosity. I talked a lot about generosity. And how generosity is a good thing to do. Generosity is wholesome in Buddhist parlance, that you should practice generosity. But it will not, in and of itself, lead to liberation unless it's informed by wisdom, unless it is animated by this different way of seeing. If we're stuck in a subject-object relationships, and I'm saying, well, I have a lot of stuff, and I'm going to give it to you because I feel sorry for you, or I want you to be happy, or something like that, that's an awesome thing to do. And you should do that as much as possible. But as you're doing it, right, at the same time, there's this different way of seeing that can come as part of that practice of offering something. It also can happen when you're receiving generosity, when you're the recipient. So I also highly encourage you to recognize how much it is that you receive, how much your life is given to you. It's so funny, actually, that we walk around thinking that we're doing the living. You know, like when it's just plain obvious that almost everything we have is completely beyond our doing. Right? Yeah, we work hard, and you need to work hard. That means to be alive. But the amount of things that come to meet you compared to the amount of things which you affect is, it's much greater, those things you receive. So generosity is opening up to the truth of that receiving. That's really important. Do that as often as possible. But this clear seeing can make that something that is liberating. And by liberation, we mean to undo the knots of cyclical living. That we're all caught in these cycles, which we replay again and again and again. You're probably familiar with many of them. Right? But in the Buddhist teaching says that our being is just completely riddled with these cycles. And sometimes the cycles are more or less positive, sometimes they're more or less negative, sometimes they're more or less neutral. They're always unstable. That means that they always have to replicate themselves. They can't just rest. And so this very fundamental anxiousness that we have about life is there in that instability. Okay, so that's what we've been talking about. We talked about generosity, we talked about ethics, and particularly the kind of ethics which is about stopping doing things that are unwholesome, and then a little bit about forbearance. Particularly, sometimes that paramita is translated as patience, which is also a good translation, but I was emphasizing a little bit the quality of forbearance. It's a more foreboding word, right? Forbearance. Patient, you kind of like, okay, I could be patient, but to bear something. is a little bit more intense. So we're talking a bit about that. So rather than moving on to vigor and meditation today, I wanted to take, I had heard from a couple people after service last time that they've been trying to get a question in, but haven't been able to. So I'd like to just open things up for some questions today, and I'll respond to them. And if we don't have any, we'll start talking about vigor. But I think there are a few questions. So. To ask questions in the assembly, you just say, Hojo-san, and put your hands together, and then ask your question.
Hojo-san.
Uh-huh.
I think a while ago you brought forward another translation for Kashanti that I really love. Constancy. Mm-hmm. And I love that because I'm like the world's least patient human being, but I think I'm very constant. Mm-hmm. And that feels a little different. Yeah. I don't know that's forbearance because I'm like, my brain's about to burst, you know. I don't feel like I'm forbearing anything. Yeah. But I'm staying with it. Yeah.
That's a translation that Suzuki Roshi, the founder of San Francisco Zen Center, and the lineages coming out of there, he used that translation. I think that has a real, there's some advantages to that word. Patience, oftentimes we think about just in terms of there's something I don't like, and can I wait long enough for it to go away? Right? That's what patience means. Or I really, really want something, can I wait long enough to get it? And that, is very wholesome. Again, going back to this basic process. We should not say, oh, those aren't important, so I'm not going to do it. We should do that. We should raise our kids. Like, hold the ice cream cone for just like 4 seconds before you give it to them. That's really helpful to them, actually. It's not just shove it in the mouth. It's like, oh, ice cream. Okay. Your whole relationship with the world shifts if you can do that. So patience is really good. To move to this kind of liberation, constancy means that we're practicing in a way that the openness of consciousness is revealed in how it is that we are with something. So in constancy, it's not just that I can wait long enough to get what I want or wait long enough for the thing I don't like to go away. Like, it was so magic that the guy stopped mowing his lawn. I always think, like, Sunday morning, really? That's when you mow your lawn? It wasn't so close, so maybe it didn't bother you, but I always hear it, I think, it bugs me a little bit. But, like, I could wait long enough for it to go away. But constancy says that the practice is not in being strong enough to wait long enough, but it's in the actual moment itself. As long as you're holding a grudge against the lawnmower, or as long as you're trying to get the ice cream, that's not really the perfection of patience. The perfection of patience is to see that there's no ice cream cone out there. There's no mower out there. There's something else that's happening, which is the expression of mind itself. And as we do that, then we find that we can be with something much more gracefully than just holding back in some way. And one of the cool things about that is, it doesn't always feel good. Which, you guys, stop being addicted to feeling good. It is not a reliable indicator of the right choice. It just is not. And we have been sort of in this groove of like, it's about how you feel, which is important, and I talk a lot about that. But just simply using it feels good or right as the indicator of what the right action is mostly gets us in trouble. And so forbearance, or in this case constancy, keeps us connected to the difficult side of whatever it is that's happening. That difficult feeling is as important as the good parts of the feeling for navigating the situation. And that's a lot what I was talking about last week, that we want to stay connected to the roots of the difficulty of living. Otherwise, we sort of start flapping in whatever wind is happening. And constancy is also about that, right? You're staying this thing. So yeah, sometimes you feel like your head's going to explode, or other parts of your body, depending on where your energy is largely located. But that's really important, because now I'm going to be much more careful about how I'm moving. Not tight kind of careful, but the kind of careful that stays attached to everything that's there.
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking about raising children while we're talking about patience.
Yeah.
And I had some amount of grace in that I could not react for a while, but I always think of it as the great cauldron of testing or perfecting or the opportunity. And it'll, you know, and it's very challenging. It's any of us who've been in that situation, and it is, you know, everything you're saying, I hear it as so important when we're raising children or taking care of children or just being with someone else in a way that is not comfortable. And so anyway, that's what I think about, and the how to it, you know. So.
And then how we can, if we take something like raising children, which is, many people do that, not everyone does that, but we just take that as a kind of instance or example of how life really is practice. You know, this is one of our deep venerative practices and acknowledgements at this particular temple. Buddhai temple is Prajnaparamita, who is right behind me to the Buddha's left, this statue, known as the mother of the Buddhas, or the Buddha eye, oftentimes is also referred to in that way. That kind of the promise of Prajnaparamita is that everything you could experience, everything you do experience, is teaching you.
Right.
That everything is an opportunity for this kind of learning. Not the accumulative learning, although that happens, but this learning which is about wisdom, you know, where things actually, they take on not an accumulative quality, but oftentimes a shedding quality. You know, like you heard this thing, like people say, when I was 18, I knew everything. And my parents drove me crazy. When I was 25, I didn't know anything, and I was going to them for advice. You know, if you have those kind of parents, that's great. You get to do that. Not everybody does. But there's also something, a kind of corollary in parenting. It's like, and true in anything that we take that has real deep, significant work. At first, we know a lot. And then really the wisdom is that we know less and less. And in the knowing less and less, we become wiser. And we're more attentive. Mindfulness or attentiveness is not just about some special state of a certain kind of focus, which is good to cultivate that awareness. But the attentiveness is something much more profound than just, can I hold my mind still, or will my mind be clear? It's, can I know little enough to actually pay attention, you know? And you think about how, like, a way a baby cries, that's so interesting how you can, I notice this, I have grandkids now, I don't know the nuances of their cries in the way I knew the nuances of my kids' cries. My kids' cries, I was just like, she's faking it. She just wants the thing I wouldn't give her, and she's going off. Or it was like, boom, I'm you know, it could be not necessarily that loud, but would just rivet me. And you know, you can know the difference. Sometimes you're wrong, but that's how you learn.
I'll just sometimes, often, trying to meet the suffering of the world is a little overwhelming, and I feel like when I'm feeling that, it goes from not turning away to kind of being fixed on the suffering side. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about that line, that clear seeing you lead to all suffering.
So this is a very subtle point. When you're really seeing clearly, it won't feel like anything. It won't feel like I'm really seeing clearly. Right? And so when we're facing suffering, that part of us that is still in an emotional turn with it is not, there's no fault in that, or we shouldn't try to get rid of all of that. But it is not in the way of the clear seeing. because the clear seeing is not of the nature of feeling or experiencing. It's what's at the basis of feeling or experiencing. And so when you set, of course it's difficult to be pressed up against that suffering. Yeah. And so the practice and forbearance there is the trust in this thing which is not of the nature of what you're experiencing, but is more fundamental. And in that very subtle way that your posture shifts when that's what you're more concerned with, then the quality of the suffering or our capacity to touch the suffering really is like a well that doesn't really have a bottom. But that's like the only way I know to practice that is right in the midst of something that's almost like unbearable, and that's why there's forbearance, because we're bearing this thing which really isn't. When it's bearable, it's not really so much forbearance. It's like, yeah, okay, guy's mowing his lawn. Not that hard. But the things that really are difficult to be part of, that takes this other thing, and not clenching up. So that's what happens when the feeling becomes the thing that we're more based in, then we clench up. And then it becomes more difficult. This time of year, I love to walk barefoot. Don't tell any of the resident students I said that, because I don't allow them to walk barefoot. Because they track stuff inside. They go in and out about barefoot. So it's like, if you wash your feet every time, it's fine. But anyway, I love to walk barefoot. And so I do often. But at the temple, I wear shoes, so I don't track things in. And I was out up in the mountains, and I was walking around, and I've got to a point where I can walk on very sharp things and not really a problem. But and that's not because I'm tough. It's because I know how to relax my feet, and I know that my feet have a job, which is not the job of my feet is not to feel good. The job of my feet includes feeling. And most of the things that hurt because I react to the pain with a stiffening of my foot. But if you learn to simply relax your foot as you walk, then you can walk on things that are pretty, you build up some calluses and stuff too, but you can walk on things that are pretty pokey, and it doesn't bug you so much. In fact, it becomes a little bit like a massage. It's like you're getting this constant feedback from your feet. And that's kind of nice. So that's the thing you can work with. To learning about that shift of perspective is my heart presence with the difficult thing. Is it open? Is it soft? Is it pliable? Is it responsive? Or is it simply hardened up? No. If it's in the no mode, then whatever you're getting hit with is going to be pretty hard to stay with.
A few weeks ago you were talking about, I think, this clear seeing, and you gave the example of a flower. Looking at this flower might allow us to think that we are kind of part of this flower, that everything is connected and whatnot.
Yeah.
And something that happens to me, maybe something similar, is more often when the sun is shining and I'm swimming in a beautiful place.
Yeah.
And I have this moment where I recognize that things are impermanent, especially myself. And as I think this, I feel a type of clarity kind of happens, and a focus. There's a different focus around me.
Yeah.
And I do see this, that I'm kind of here with all of these things. And I think to myself, well, I wonder if this is clear seeing. But I also recognize that I'm arriving at that thought with a little bit of grief of the impermanence. And so I'm wondering, is this the clear seeing, or is it maybe taking that feeling, it's propelling me and stepping forward into it?
This is a very, very subtle question. And I just want to pause for a moment and acknowledge how profound what you're saying is. particularly the part to recognize the grief that is present. This is really something that we largely run from in spiritual work. We know the grief's important, but we kind of want it to be over here and be the like, oh, and I'm digging it out and it's very emotive or something, and then, oh, the clear seeing's, that's all going to be gone. That's not how it is. Actually, there is this quality of impermanence, which is the first flavor of emptiness that I've been talking about, that already broken quality, the recognition that it's impermanent. If we're not feeling a little tinge of grief around that, we're probably hiding something. And particularly in the teaching of forbearance, so there's many ways to talk about forbearance, but classically there's 3 levels to the forbearance, and the first one is putting up with difficult stuff, okay? Whether that's done to you purposely or just happens in some way. The second one is to be able to bear the profundity of reality. And that's what you're talking about. There's a place where there's the profound nature of being is not conformed to our grasping. And that is hard to bear because so much of the way we live is based in that grasping, right? The third one is receptivity to suffering. And so when the second one, when you can forbear, you can be present with, you can have constancy with that reality of impermanence, then the receptivity to suffering is really possible. That receptivity to suffering is where all the branches grow from that tree of awakening. And so we don't need to think about, is it clear seeing or is it not clear seeing? We just, because clear seeing isn't a thing, we can't locate it like that. Simply take a step in. And the feeling that you have about it is not a problem at all. But it's also an indicator that, oh, I can place my foot here, I can place my foot there. And it's a path that emerges. That's what the clear seeing has to offer us, is not a place, but a path. Yeah. Now I'm particularly touched by your comment because I like to go up to a lake called Waldo Lake. Have people been there before? It's one of the most beautiful places on the planet. And it was smoky, so I was thinking maybe it would be a little bit rough. But I have this little sailboat, and I like to go out on the sailboat. And now, because a whole bunch of it burned, the whole North Shore is closed. But not to sailboat. So anyway, I was out there last week, and I sleep on my boat, which is kind of a funny thing, and it's pretty wild and intense, and there's no wind at all in the first half of the day, so you just sit there for hours, and then jump off the boat and go swimming. And exactly that experience you're talking about was there's something about being in that clear water and the moon overhead, and then like, oh, this is it. It doesn't last. It's not about lasting. And there's some sorrow in that. And there's also aliveness in that. And so maybe I was resonating with that. The teaching that water has for us. Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't want to just maybe let us sit for a moment what you just said, because it's very nice. But I was thinking, because you keep talking about this like softening and forbearance of like things that are kind of painful, and I was wondering, kind of in a sense, how often do you feel really awful? Because I was thinking, I used to cry a lot. I was like a baby in my crib, and I thought, wow, it's like it's really awful, but you do that sort of softening, and you're like, you're not trying to you don't want to like tense up against it. And so you're like kind of maybe trying to like soften yourself, or like, like you spoke with your foot. You're like trying to step on these sharp things, but it still feels really awful. And it's like, what would you say to that? 'Cause
So when you're picking up your foot, I'm going to use it kind of metaphorically, but when you're picking up your foot, if it still hurts, then you're grasping onto the pain. That's another part of it. So we're touching something which is painful, and then as our foot comes up, what do we experience? Another pattern that we have, or a kind of tendency that a lot of us have, is to take the painful thing and to ruminate on it. So the rumination becomes another place that we need to pay attention to, the relinquishment of that kind of grasping. So there's very subtle work to do there, where we're connected to the difficulty, but we're also not fetishizing the difficulty and making the difficulty this kind of reason for my being or reason for my action in some way.
Sure. So it's like I was saying, like I try not to hold on to it because everyone was a baby in a crib once.
Yeah.
So I was like thinking about it, and it's like I think sometimes it's just hard to like remember those things.
Yeah.
That's a long time going.
Yeah.
You're trying to remember. Like sometimes it just comes up that you like it kind of meets you in a certain. Maybe you could speak to that some. Like it seems to meet you in a certain space where you feel a little bit uncomfortable and you're thinking like, wow, that's a sort of difficult thing.
Yeah. So the for those experiences or memories to emerge within a heart and a mind as important facts of our being is absolutely necessary. There's all kinds of teachings which are kind of medicine, but they in the end have a big problem, is that they're trying to tell you to undercut those facts of being in some way. So for example, if you have a big loss in your life, if you're lucky, that will never go away. The loss will never, our job is not to try to convince ourselves that the loss is okay, or that, it's a long time ago and so I don't remember it or whatever. Those really deep losses will come back with a kind of a deep grief. And our job is not to lose those, it's to be receptive to them. And oftentimes when we're closer to the event in time and we're in the throes of grief or difficulty or whatever it is, in a way we haven't been able to get down to the receptivity of the suffering. We're just suffering. We're learning to be receptive to the suffering. And that's one of the reasons that it feels so strong and it cycles. But as our grief matures, if we're working with it skillfully, it's not that the grief goes away. It's that the receptivity to suffering is like a signal of truth, is teaching us something that's real. So I'm not saying that we should dwell in the difficulty for the purposes of dwelling in the difficulty. We should invigorate our mind, invigorate our heart, be joyous. All of those things are not in opposition to this difficulty, and that's what we're learning in forbearance, is that we can be present with very difficult things and our lives can be wonderful. Those two go together. In fact, the lives with that you will see with the most kind of joy and fulfillment, if you can talk with the people who are living that way, you will find a core of real loss and difficulty in their life. It's just going to be there, for sure. Yeah, and so when you're on the side of that loss and difficulty, then, it's helpful to see that, because then you can know, oh, because joy is possible for me. I don't have to be locked in that, just in that thing. A lot of work, though. Yeah.
I think in the last 3 questions, you've been maybe you've already said this,
Yeah.
so I'd like you to really, really thread the needle on this idea that as we encounter these beings suffering, right?
Yeah.
We're not trying to, in clear seeing, we're not trying to avoid them out, but it's exactly the suffering that this suffering is the liberation. That's kind of like a ham-fisted way of trying to present it. But there's something that I'm feeling remains unsaid, and I really, really want to put my finger on it.
Yeah.
It's not exactly suffering is liberation, although suffering is liberation.
So the putting your finger on it is what we should always try to do, and realize that it will liberate us from our capacity to actually do it every time. That's no reason to not try to put your finger on it. That's intention and practice to try to put your finger on it, but to realize that the way that we're thinking about it will have to change, and that will continue to happen. So let me offer you a kind of image that you might consider, and that might change the way you're thinking about it and guide your finger a bit. In a certain branch of Buddhist teaching, which is referred to as Yogacara teaching, there is understanding that our consciousness has many different layers. And the first set of layers are all layers of consciousness through which we can experience things. So when we talk about consciousness, we talk about consciousness of the eye or the ear, or the nose or the tongue or the body or the mind, that those are all places where we experience. But then there are some layers of consciousness that are not of the nature of experiencing. And the deepest layer of that consciousness is referred to as the alaya consciousness, or the storehouse consciousness. And the storehouse consciousness is the place in which all experience is leaving marks. And it's in some ways related to what we would refer to in psychology as the subconscious. So in that teaching, that's a kind of that doesn't only exist in Yogacara, exists in other branches of Buddhist teachings, but they're kind of the big proponents of it. There is this understanding that this alaya consciousness and is like a mirror, and that it is actually the clear seeing, that it is wisdom, that it is the Buddha consciousness. And because it is that, it can be receptive to every experience. It can be receptive to every functioning of this world. And that the two are completely undividable in that fundamental quality of consciousness. So the reason I'm bringing this up is that when we talk about this touching, there is no avoiding touching, whether that, in whatever way that comes, visually or physically or anything. And so our job is, in this orienting of the clear seeing, is not to either engage the touching or avoid the touching, or touch the right things, not touch the wrong things, etc. It's that no matter what is encountered, that it is of the quality of that illumination. And we practice that very directly within Zazen, and it's not perfectible in the sense that we could grab what it is. It's only perfectible in the actuality of the illumination, which is then our work to let our center of gravity settle there. So it's a way of thinking about it.
It's only suffering. It's only illumination.
Yeah.
It's only touching.
There's no way to pull them apart. And sometimes people will hear that kind of teaching and they will say, that kind of teaching is saying, well, there's nothing to be done. But actually it means the opposite. It means that whatever is done can be done in a way that is not the avoidance of that difficulty, but is a cultivation, is a liberation, is a medicine that is possible. And so it's not like, several of you are work in helping fields of different kinds, and in the hospitals particularly. If you're going to visit someone in a room and they're in terrible suffering, just sitting there and being kind of self-centered in your clear witnessing of their suffering, that's not the spiritual work. Sometimes just to sit with a person is what they need. But if we're actually relying on that non-differentiation, we'll find our hands are moving, we'll find our tongues wagging. Yeah, and that is the authentic response, which comes from the bravery to actually go there. And when we're not going there, this, by the way, is the 5th flavor of emptiness that I was talking about. Those of you who've been tracking that from the past few talks, where up until that point, in a way, we can kind of stay in observation. 3rd, not so much observation, but then actually, when does it hit? That's a place where it's like, buck up. And that bucking up can't just be you forcing it forward. It's like your insides have to open up. And when your insides open up backwards this way, you can step forward. And then, that's the kind of direct meeting. It's scary as hell.
Ojo-san?
Hi.
I have been thinking since last week about what you had said about forbearance.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, I listened to your talk again last night. And I realize there are different levels. You could have patients sitting in the waiting room of the hospital emergency ward, or it's the patients you have taking care of an infant child or an ailing loved one. And there are different levels. Some are harder to take, I believe.
In a way, we're trained to take the hardest, with our life, especially if we love. Because that will bring us right to the edge. I oftentimes think that maybe is the whole purpose of love. That we will stay there with the deep difficulty of impermanence. If we didn't, we'll turn away. And for some people that love can be very spiritual, it can be very just like not attached in any way, but my experience is that we shouldn't begrudge the kind of love which is the deep entanglement, intimate entanglement of a human life. And when we have that will take us, it'll take us right to the edge of this difficulty. And all the training that we do, telling the kids to get the hell out of the kitchen while you're finishing up dinner, putting up with and gratefully accepting your husband's comments about your cooking. All of those things, the kind of patience that we develop in being able to be in relation when we come to the really hard thing, which is the dispersing of a human consciousness and mind and life and body, then we can stay with it. If we haven't had all of those places to learn what it means to be with difficulty, I just don't think we can really stay. So I really admire your patience and the clarity with which you're facing, this period of your life, and beloved Tenkan's, his transformation. So you could teach the class next week. We don't only have to talk about forbearance. I feel like we might need to make the turn into vigor here pretty soon.
This has been really helpful, all this thread that's been going on today. And I find just time again this desire to withdraw from the work-family dynamic that I'm just always in all the time. And the story that I ruminate on is that I'm an introvert. I don't have any introvert time to like recharge my batteries. I'm always exhausted. So I'm always in this posture of trying to pull back. Not always, but basically it's almost 100% accurate to say that if I'm able to meditate for a certain amount of time each day, that lightens. And if I'm not able to work that in, it's just, I'm just guarded. I'm just kind of withdrawn all day. And I searched all I can in vain to find any other pathway besides just sitting down. It's a stupid question, but can you talk more about the magic of Zazen and why it provides that clear seeing to allow the suffering to become liberation?
Yeah. So I would preface this by saying what we want to learn is that Zazen is not only taking up the posture of Zazen. And that the way that Zazen functions outside of the posture of Zazen is very important to study. And I know you study that. It's very hard to study it or impossible to study it without actually taking the posture of Zazen too. So a lot of people say, oh great, well I don't really have to sit. I'll do my coffee drinking meditation or whatever it is, which is great. I love coffee drinking meditation, but it's not Zazen. I mean, it could be, but it probably isn't. So we kind of set those things against each other in a funny way where there's kind of an esoteric way we could talk about it, but basically just do both, right? Try to cultivate both. Sit down. Make a life in which you can sit down. And I have met almost nobody who can't make a life where they can sit down. I'll bet a lot of people who won't, right? Or have a difficult time doing it, which is basically everybody. And so that's true, but we just have to make the time happen. And so that's important. But making the time happen then is a way for your whole life then to become part of that. And I hear that in what you're saying. That when you can find that time, then you know how to find it in all the other places. It's not that you're doing the sitting here, so you've got yourself kind of inoculated or straightened out, and you can handle it the rest of the time. What you want to be shooting for is you're doing the formal sitting, and that allows you to continue doing that same work when you're moving around. And that doing that kind of work while you're moving around then allows the sitting. They mirror each other. That. So the magic is really that complete non-division between suffering, samsara, cyclical existence, and the mind of Buddha. In a way, it's not, sometimes I talk about it, I feel like I'm saying something that's so esoteric. But just think about it. The Buddha was born into this world. The Buddha was awakened here in this world. The Buddha spent his whole life with others. Didn't lift off from all the malarkey at all. Now, did he ever feel like lifting off from the malarkey? My guess is probably. But he practiced forbearance and didn't talk a lot about it, right? But there's just no separation. The awakening that the Buddha came upon was not an awakening of escape. It was awakening of total presence. And when we sit down in this posture, whether we're on the ground or in a chair, standing, when we take that posture, we are receiving the body of the Buddha. And by body here, I don't mean just the fleshy body. I mean the mind of Buddha, the body of Buddha, the heart of Buddha. We're receiving all of that because the Buddha never ever begrudges it. And just all we do is we come together like this. And our own doing, our own practice in that situation to clear our mind, to settle, to find that place where we can allow for a deeper part of our being to come forward. That all is an outgrowth, or we could say it is a continual process of that receiving. It's not that we're reaching down there digging the stuff out. We're receiving something, and so that all emerges. And that to me is really the deep medicine of Buddhism, and particularly a Buddhist style meditation, as opposed to many types of meditation which are telling you that your thoughts, your feelings, all these other things are somehow kind of like your enemies in one way or another. At best, they're kind of just an illusion. And that's why last week I was emphasizing about many of the non-dual teachings, which you will hear, especially if you go on the internet and you're listening to different teachers and stuff. Highly encourage you to do that. You can listen to non-dual teachers, but just be aware of this thing, which oftentimes appears in those non-dual teachings, that a place of ease, unity, non-differentiation is held as being what is true, and then all the stuff that you're experiencing in your life is an illusion. That's the quality of those teachings often. And so if you're having difficulty in this realm of illusion, if you could just wake up to this substratum of oneness, then everything would be relieved. That may be true, but you will likely also be a flake. You won't do what needs to be done to harmonize what is true in this provisional world. The provisional world is not less true than the world of unity. That's the Buddhist teaching, that they're completely, it goes both directions. And so when you dip into those moments of silence, and you're concentrating on the total receptivity of that open, broad, still mind, then you don't try to destroy the phenomena of living. You want it to be as whole and true and well as it can be. And that slight little difference there, I bring it up not because I want to criticize the non-dual teachings, but because almost all of us hold on to this little kind of hope that if we could just get to the substratum, that all of this stuff would disappear. And that going back and forth between those two places is exhausting. Actually, there's something much more rich that's just right there. And you got little kiddos, so they'll just test you right away.
And a wife.
I wasn't going to say it. Well, I'm sure you test her not at all.
She's not here yet.
Yeah.
Nobody tell me.
Well, this is, we should end. I'll just say one more thing and we can finish up. But this is, I was saying in total truth, but also a little bit of a joke last week when I was talking about these things that we split apart and we think you should have one without the other, like peace without clear boundaries, for example. But the one I was sort of saying a little bit of joke was like intimacy and annoyance. And we think that to be in like a real intimate relationship, like with our beloved, that would only be like good feelings. But anybody who's really knows that kind of intimacy, you know that it's also marked with all of this difficulty, right? That's how it's supposed to be. Who's gonna call you on your shit, right? Except for that person who you're close with like that. And that doesn't always work out, and it's always not the place that it functions well. But there's this chance for it there, where the closer and closer we get, the deeper we can be rubbed. Like I remember when the first, like 5-10 years of being married, I don't understand how this person can activate such anger in me. Like, what is going on? Like, it just would blow me away. It was weird. And for me, it wasn't, for those of you who know my wife, she's not the kind of anger-inducing type too much. So it wasn't like she would just do these horrible things that would piss me off. And so it was even more weird. It was like, where is this coming from? And that's also where this teaching about not trying to split these apart, that difficulty that comes in that intimacy is what is actually can turn something in us. We have to meet something which we cannot control. Like, say, the person we love, which is so frustrating, but actually what we want. We don't want to control them. I mean, that's when it becomes unsatisfying, right? Yeah. Anyway, I'll start preaching about that. Next week, vigor. Or you can also call it zeal, depending on. I like vigor because you can kind of get down in your belly when you say it. With zeal, it's kind of up here. Vigor, like that. That we'll talk about.